Here, coming to you with today's mental investment. So we're still reading out of Three Magic Words by U.S. Anderson. I am personally on the last chapter. It's on Immortality, chapter 11. I had my place all marked, and now I can't find it. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna start here. I don't want to read too much, but it's like so good. All of it is so good. Okay, I'm gonna start here. If you don't have the beginning of it, you don't know what it's talking about. So I'm gonna just start from the beginning, and I'm just gonna try to read fast. All too often, okay, this is on immortality, and spirit never dies. All too often, those who search for the soul's immortality do so in answer to the question, will a man live again? And they cloud the issue for if a man be immortal, he never dies, nor is he ever born. He simply is. That which has no ending can have no beginning, and that which has no beginning or ending is timeless and infinite. Its pure being exists forever. It is apparent that the body is not immortal. It has an obvious beginning and an obvious ending. What we expect to be immortal in man is thus invisible, is spirit, a mysterious presence that animates body with consciousness. Each of us knows this presence very well, for it is what we feel ourselves to be. It is what we refer to when we say I. This I then is consciousness we know to be ourselves, is what we expect to be perpetrated after the death of the body. What and who is this I? Is it the accumulated memories of a lifetime? Is it the knowledge each of us has attained? Is it some central perception station at the nerve endings of the five senses? Perhaps it's all of these, but it is a certainty that it is consciousness, for only that which is conscious is capable of referring to itself as I, and consciousness is invisible. There, so now consciousness is visible. We think I is I, our physical body, but consciousness is invisible. True, we mark consciousness in another being by observing that it is animated, but we never see this consciousness, never touch or hear it. It exists within the very depths of the creature. And we understand it all only by understanding the consciousness in ourselves. There are not different kinds of consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness. The sense of self that peers from behind your eyes is the same sense of self that peers from behind the eyes of your neighbor. Though this awareness is never at the same identical stage of development in any two beings, the difference is always one degree. The difference is always one of degree and never of kind. I'm going to read that again. There are not different kinds of consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness. The sense of self that peers from behind your eyes is the same sense of self that peers from behind the eyes of your neighbor. Though this awareness is never at the same identical stage of development in any two beings, the difference is always one of degree and never of kind. One self pervades the universe, and differentiating in any attempt to know itself better. All right, I'm getting too excited and it's not coming out well. I'm gonna stop and start over. There are not different kinds of consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness. The sense of self that peers from behind your eyes is the same sense of self that peers from behind the eyes of your neighbor. Though this awareness is never at the same identical stage of development in any two beings, the difference is always one of degree and never of kind. One self pervades the universe. And differentiating in an attempt to know itself better, it attains to finiteness and uniqueness by becoming multiplicity instead of unity. Each creature is thus an expression of the immortal self. There is that within which was never born and which will never die. You are immortal. Your true being is immortal. What is this deathless, ageless spirit that each of us senses within himself? How seems and how difficult to understand. Like mercury, it slithers from under our fingers the minute we try to grasp it. For a second, a moment, we have a flash of insight, so that we seem right on the verge of discovering some mighty secret. Then we begin to think about it, and it disappears, leaving us wondering if we haven't imagined it. Something blocks us away from the discovery. Some false habit of thought bars us from true knowledge of self. The culprit is the ego, the erroneous sense of self which we accumulate during our lifetimes. The death of the ego, which we fear so much, is the very thing we must achieve before we take unto ourselves the consciousness of immortal self. Let us reconsider the timeless, spaceless qualities of universal subconscious mind, which has no beginning and no end, which is conscious but not self-conscious, and which is immortal being. Self without beginning or end incarnates, and in so doing becomes something with a beginning. Anything with a beginning must have an end, and so the cycle of birth and death of physical bodies is established. With the birth of the physical body, there is gradually built up something subtle and diluting. The accumulated experience undergone by self within body, which gives rise to a sense of separateness and isolation. That is what we call the ego. This is memory of the beginning of physical experience, and we are deluded into calling it I. In this manner, we fail to perceive our true being, identify ourselves with the shallow and transitory little ego, and are shut away from the infinite and immortal intelligence from which we have sprung. Nearly everyone considers his ego to be his true self, and as a result is totally unable to comprehend a life after the death of the physical body. He remembers the birth of his ego and his first experiences and thoughts, and thus he senses the ego's inevitable end. Since he identifies himself with ego, he either looks forward with fear to undesirable oblivion or refuses to consider the matter of eventual death at all. If fear has been sufficiently ingrained in him by the practitioners of Maoism, he even fancies himself faced by the possibility of providing an eternal roast for the fires of hell. If fear has been sufficiently ingrained in him by the practitioners of Maoism, he even fancies himself faced by the possibility of providing an eternal roast for the fires of hell. That's religion. That's what religion will do to you. Have you living a life of fear? Have you living a life where the only consideration you have is, will I make it to heaven or hell? When really we're living a hell and heaven or hell here, now, based off of how we vibrate. It's not in the afterlife that we will go to a heaven or a hell. It's what we create now, today, which determines if we live in heaven or hell. Know that. Please know that. Rebirth of consciousness. Ego, the tinsel trapping of self-awareness, is the undoing of us all. It bars us from consciousness of universal self. It perceives all things as existing outside of consciousness, and thus deludes us into believing that things originate on the physical plane. It loads us with a sense of personal responsibility, engenders bitterness and hate by its fancied wounds, sees itself as a speck in a limitless universe, and blows itself up all the bigger in a hopeless attempt to feel infinity. Just not possible. You cannot feel infinity. The question is not the question is not how the ego shall live, but how the ego shall die. For only when the ego dies do we truly begin to live. I'm going to stop here because I want to say something. Anything we read or listen to, we have to take what resonates with us and leave the rest. It's not that you can't take anything from what you're reading or what you're digesting, but if it doesn't resonate with you, if it doesn't sit true, if it doesn't feel right for you, just leave that. And so in this part of the book, there's something about, they're going to make a comment about being meek and humble that I don't necessarily agree with. When you look at the definition of humble, is to think lowly of ourselves. None of us should be out here thinking lowly of ourselves. We are creators. We are here to have dominion over the earth, over the world. So what's lowly about that? Nothing, not a thing. So I'm gonna read it as I say, as it's read, as it's written. But when I look up and look like this, y'all know I ain't with it. I do not believe in humbling ourselves. All right. The ego is mortal. It has its beginning and it has its end. When death overtakes the body, it overtakes the ego also. Freed at last from delusion, self knows self and sees its immortality. The fear of death then springs from the ego's fear of disillusion, but only because we cling to the ego as our true selves. He who perceives at the center of consciousness the great self which is buried there lets go of the ego forever and moves in tune with the infinite. The death of the physical body frees us all from the bonds of the ego, but the unshackling of these bonds during our lifetime brings power. So when we die, the ego is going to die with the body. But if we were to put consciously, intentionally learn how to put the ego to rest, to sleep, and not allow it to be what's driving our decisions, then that's when we find power now in this lifetime. So it's really learning how to allow the ego to work for you. There is a reason, there is a use for ego. The ego is made and its intent is to keep us safe, to keep us well confined within our comfort zone. That is its responsibility. It does a good job at that. It is for us to overcome that with our knowledge, knowing that that cuts us off from infinite intelligence, that cuts us off from the source of our true being, and that is not acceptable. So when we realize that, then we can then become intentional about, you go to sleep right now. He's talking to you right now. You are not leading this right now, right? And then you tap into your subconscious mind and get the direction and get the information from your true self, your center of command, your center of power. All right, let's keep reading. The death of the physical body frees us all from the bonds of the ego, but the unshackling of these bonds during our lifetime brings power. The death of the ego, then, is not a thing to be avoided, but a thing to be welcomed, a spiritual awakening that illumines all things, a transfiguration wherein the soul becomes fused with immortal self. It is attained through humility, through love, through non-resistance, through fusion with universal subconscious mind at the center of consciousness. Who achieves this consciousness perceives immortality. Yeah, so it does say it is attained through humility. And I really think that that just means by not being so arrogant, not being so self-focused, and knowing that it's about your soul and about the greater good. Really, that's what I get from that, about, moving into this by fusing yourself with the immortal, your immortal self. You do that by humility through not being arrogant, not just thinking it's all about you, but not by thinking lowly of ourselves, okay? One mind, one spirit, one self pervades the universe, and its purpose is to know itself. It is primal stuff, first cause of all things, and is engaged in a work of expanding consciousness. Neither space nor time exists in it, for it is infinite, nor does it adhere to any form, for it is all form. It creates is an expression of its knowledge of itself. Amen. Neither space nor time exists in it, for it is infinite, nor does it adhere to any form, for it is all form. It is becoming things. It becomes all things, and each form it creates is an expression of its knowledge of itself. It is eternal. It is eternal now, which is all times, present, past, and future. It is one place, which is all places and any place. It is invisible. It is spirit. It is intelligence. It is mind. It is God incarnated into form. It becomes that form. And when the form dissolves, the spirit again becomes universal. It is this in man which is immortal, not the body, not the ego, not the personality, but the self. He who attains to awareness of the self in life attains to power. I want to read that again more smoothly. One mind, one spirit, one self pervades the universe, and its purpose is to know itself. It is primal stuff, first cause of all things, and is engaged in a work of expanding consciousness. Neither space nor time exist in it, for it is infinite, nor does it adhere to any form, for it is all form. It is becoming things. It becomes all things, and each form it creates is an expression of its knowledge of itself. It is eternal now, which is all times, past, present, and future. It is one place, which is all places and any place. It is invisible. It is spirit. It is intelligence. It is mind. It is God, incarnated into form. It becomes that form, and when the form dissolves, the spirit again becomes universal. It is this in man which is immortal, not the body, not the ego, not the personality, but the self. He who attains to awareness of the self in life attains to power. The one self within all beings become different according to what it enters and exits also without. It's one. It's one energy, one source that has been projected, blown up. We're all fractals. We're all images. We're all mighty replicas of the source. And we have the ability to create just like the source has created. Matter of fact, we don't have just the ability, we have the responsibility to create. We are here to create. That is our purpose. Self is universal subconscious mind, which is infinite. All of it exists within each of us, and all of it exists without. For infinity is absolute unity and cannot be divided. It is this that Jesus meant when he said, the Father in me and I, the Father in me and I in the Father. Therefore, if we perceive our immortality, we must perceive the timeless being that exists at the center of our consciousness. But whether we attain to this illumination or not, we are immortal still. Everlasting life is not given to some and taken from others, for we are all one in reality. To him who is held firm in the bonds of ego, the veil will yet be lifted. When the physical body dies and the ego ceases its delusion, then he shall know as he is known. Sorry, I don't know if that cut off because I had a call coming in. Then he shall know as he is known, shall see self in self, shall perceive in an instant the vast reaches of infinity. But a degree of this power and perception can be ours in this lifetime, if we can only forsake the ego and take unto ourselves the mantle of God. Ego proceeds from the conscious mind, though they are not identical. Conscious mind is the these children keep calling me. I call them back. It is a classifying, tabulating, analyzing machine governed solely by sensory stimuli and perceiving all things as existing outside it. It builds habits, patterns of work, and a mass of experience and perceives the movement of time. Thus, the ego is compounded of memory and prompts us to act always in the light of experience. Ooh. Thus, the ego is compounded of memory and prompts us to act in the light of experience. Remember when I said the ego wants to keep us in our comfort zone? It wants to keep us safe because it has this experience, this past that it relates to and feels like because that happened then, this will happen again. So I have to keep you protected. But that is not it. We know that the past does not dictate our future. What dictates our future and our tomorrow and our now are our thoughts, our words, what we say now, how we feel now, where our energy goes now, predict or determine what we see tomorrow, not our past experiences. So what the ego is trying to base its responses on is no longer relevant for us in some cases. According to the ego's conception, so our lives become. This thing we falsely call I, this ego, sees its limitations and brings those limitations into our lives. It fears and hates and envies, for it seeks constantly to pull itself up by vain posturing, by blind attitude, and it brings into our lives the physical results of these mental causes and keeps us constantly in chains. So it is that a man must first be meek and humble before he can enter the kingdom of heaven, before he can become fused with immortal self. Sometimes he comes to it through great suffering, sometimes through despair, sometimes through pain, but always the ego is reduced to nothingness before the portal swings open. And the ego does not surrender lightly. This posturing little elf with its blind delusions would have us believe it is our true self. And when we attempt to cast it aside, we feel it struggle in the very depths of our souls. So great is its resistance that man so great is its resistance that men mortify the flesh, practice celibacy, abstain from all sensual pleasure in an attempt to ignore the evidence of the senses so that the ego might leave and the center of consciousness be revealed. The ego is what we seem to be. The knowledge of what we truly are lies at the center of consciousness. Such knowledge is perceived only by him who strips the ego bare, cast it aside like a worn out garment. There is a kind of death in this, because we are accustomed to regard the ego as our true self, but the ego shall die anyway. And he who achieves death in life obtains power in life. You do not have to wait until you are dead, until you transition to go to a heaven, to have your best life. You are supposed to have your best life now. You get to decide what that looks like. You get to choose. There's no one else. You have the power. You don't have to wait on anybody or get validation from anybody. Live your life. Create your life. Be you. So, okay, it says, there is a kind of death in this because we are accustomed to regard the ego as our true self, but the ego shall die anyway, and he who achieves its death in life attains power. Said Jesus, unless a man be born again, he shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Seek the death of the ego and be born anew in the knowledge of self. So when it says seek the death of the ego, what I say to this is what it's saying. What I take away from this is seek the death of the ego when needed. Sometimes we need that protection from the ego to keep us protected from the outside, the fuckery of the world. Let me just be real. But when we're dealing with ourselves and we're trying to get to the true part of us, when we're evolving ourselves, when we're discovering ourselves, when we're determining who we're going to be, that is when you need to put the ego to death. You need to silence it. So I'm hoping that I'm distinguishing when and how, because it's important. This book just says put it to death, but it just shouldn't be put to death in its eternity. It has a purpose. So know its purpose and when to use it. It is the self that is immortal. It is the self, universal subconscious mind, which we truly are. All men have everlasting life, and it is not a question of whether we shall live again, but the insistent and glorious fact that Our real selves shall never die, just as they are never born. The spirit is birthless and deathless and changeless. The spirit is birthless and deathless and changeless. What will the afterlife be like? It will be like stepping from the consciousness of a gnat into the consciousness of infinity. With the death of the physical body, we shrug off the bonds of conscious mind and ego, lay aside the limitations of flesh, and become one with the universal subconscious mind, pervading all time and places. We shall have no bodies in the hereafter, for we shall be all bodies. We shall be in no specific place in the hereafter, for we shall be in all places. We shall not meet old friends and loved ones in the hereafter, for we all shall be one, unified and indivisible, one self, one mind, one eternal I. The question is sometimes asked, what good is a hereafter like that? Unless a man have a body and five senses and things to accomplish and friends to meet with, what good is it? Wouldn't oblivion be better? And the only answer possible to this question is that oblivion is inevitable for the part of any man that asks this question. For it is the ego that poses it. It is the conscious mind built up of the experience of the five senses that seeks to perpetuate itself. And it is no more than a flower, a bud on the everlasting shoot, flowering in season and withering out of season. Life with its give and take, serve and be served, strive and accomplish, cannot in any manner be compared with existence in the hereafter. Life is the ego's day in the sun. The hereafter is the eternity of self. The hereafter is the eternity of self. Life is the ego's day in the sun. Life goes with body. Eternity goes with your immortal self. Space and time are body. Space and time and body are the means by which universal subconscious mind seeks an ever greater self-awareness. From infinity, immortal self incarnates in space and time, and what it becomes is an expression of its knowledge of itself. As its ideas of self enlarges, it withdraws from body and incarnates again in a higher expression. All evolution follows this path, constantly upward, always increasing in self-awareness. To everyone at some time in his life has come the startling magnitude of his own consciousness, perhaps for a second only, and he has been overcome by the question, why do I live at this particular time, in this particular place, in these particular circumstances? Indeed, what miracle has caused me to exist at all? And at that moment, he stands very close to the veil, almost sees through it, but not quite, almost understands what it is beyond it, but not quite. He is startled and a little uncomfortable, seized by a strange sense of vertigo, wondering whether life itself is not a dream, is not the dream, a sleep he has fallen into at some dimly remembered place from which he will awaken at any moment. But usually he shuts aside this rare moment of mystical experience and concerns himself again with the workday material world, taking assurance from the solidity of physical objects and the sharp definition of sensory perception. Thus he lives like an ostrich, burying his head in the sands of life and refusing to examine the most miraculous things of life, his own consciousness, where it has come from and where it is going. Sprung from the everlasting self into life, there is in each child the remembrance of universal subconscious. But as his ego develops and he attains memory of sensory experience and the conscious mind grows, the memory becomes dimmer and dimmer until at last he can recall it no longer, blocked from its view by the posturing ego which clutters the vision of the spirit. So it was that Jesus said, unless you become as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. That was today's mental investment, brought to you by 3 Magic Words, the chapter about immortality. I am Sabria Morris. I help spiritual beings amplify their intentions through herbs, minerals, crystals, mindset mastery, through this channel, through my product, Bank Powder. Bank Powder was created to bring wealth, love, protection into your life, your home, your business, your bank accounts. This is one of the blends of Bank Powder. Can you see that? It's Money of America. This blend is used to I sprinkle this in my candles. I sprinkle it in my mop water to put that energy of wealth and protection all throughout my home. There's so many different usages for Bank Powder. If you'd like to learn more or get you some Bank Powder, visit me at bankpowder.com and you can get all you want. It's Christmas, so get you some gift cards or get some extra bottles to share with other people. I also have pens that are Bank Powder pens. And in this pen, it's the Bank Powder. So everything you write, everything that you sign, you're signing with the energy of wealth. You're signing with the energy of power. You're signing with the energy of intention. So that is my share for today. Thank you for sticking and checking me out, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.